I told you that the abortion rate is in decline, that the divorce rate is in decline, that teen pregnancies are down, that teen sex is down, that extramarital affairs are down, you might draw the conclusion that social conservatives and evangelicals, the culture war issues that they have been pursuing for decades, have actually been successful, because these are the very things that they have been, we have been promoting: a decline in abortion, a decline in divorce, and so on and so forth. And this is, in fact, what a recent journalist and pundit named Noah Smith, this is the conclusion he came to. He looked at all these statistics. He looked at things like the percentage of children living without one or both parents. He looked at the share of high schoolers who have ever had sex. He looked at, yes, again, the abortion rate, the divorce rate, and all of these things are in decline. Some of them are at historic lows in the United States. So what explains this? Well, Smith's argument is that despite the fact that social conservatives like to say that they're defeated or they're being defeated or that the progressive agenda is steamrolling them or whatever, that actually they've made some massive wins in culture. Now, some of these we can directly tie to legislation. So, for example, in the state level, one reason that abortions are down is that there have been a number of successful legislations to reduce abortion at the state level. But most of these I don't think can be explained by legislation. It has more to do with culture. And so this leads Smith to maybe to pontificate and say, well, maybe people are just sick of the sexual revolution. Maybe that's why teenagers are having less sex. Maybe they're just sick of this highly liberal and free sexuality that has been so dominant in our culture since at least the 60s, if not much earlier. And again, his argument is, hey, social conservatives have been successful. But I want to offer a less cheery explanation for these statistics. I think it's possible that actually we can achieve most of the positive social outcomes that social conservatives and evangelicals have been pursuing for decades, while still making sex in our society less and less human and more atomized. And in fact, what I think each of these statistics has in common is that at least they're at least in part rooted in this idea of sex as atomized and instrumental. I'll explain that in a minute. Really what I mean is sex that assumes that we are our own and we belong to ourselves. So, for example, the decline in abortion rates, which is really good news, is also tied to the decline in pregnancies overall. The decline in extramarital affairs we have to also look at in light of the decline in marriage and the decline in teens having sex. When we look at the decline in teens having sex, we also have to look at the rise of pornography, the massive rise of pornography in our society. When we look at the declining number of children who are living without one or both parents, we also have to acknowledge that, well, there are just fewer parents because there are fewer kids, because there are fewer pregnancies. The decline in divorce, good news also, but fewer people are getting married in the first place. At each turn, each of these moves, I think, shows a culture that tries to dehumanize sex by severing it from its natural consequences and purposes, making it into a tool for personal pleasure or expression only, or primarily. And the thing is that sex, at least good sex, turns out to be a lot of work, at least in marriage, and when it's done well. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional work, spiritual work, mental, relational, mental effort, time. And if we are our own and we belong to ourselves and we're free to pursue our desires and use our bodies really any way we want, then sex with other people is really kind of terrible. What I mean is that it requires vulnerability. It often involves drama. It can create life, which can really throw your life for a loop. Right? If all of a sudden you have this kid that you've got to take care of, sometimes it unintentionally creates deep bonds. You have to spend time with these people to try to get things to work. There's always the risk of rejection. It's difficult. In a word, it's inefficient. If we are our own, then we're the only ones responsible for making a life that is good, that is meaningful, that's justified, that's significant. And if that's true, really anything that ties us down or limits us or constrains us, like marriage or a relationship at all, long term, children certainly, those things are potential existential threats because those are things that can prevent you from pursuing the life you want, being the you desire to be. So actually, society helps us. It helps us by making sex less embodied and more efficient. And guess what? A lot of things that make sex difficult, that make it inefficient, like children, are social outcomes that many social conservatives want to reduce. They want to reduce abortions. They want to reduce teen pregnancies. They want to reduce teen sex, divorce, extramarital affairs. But behind these, I think, is a deeper decline in human intimacy, in commitment, and in procreation. What we're seeing is sex as disengaged, so that even our own bodies are tools for pleasure rather than part of our being itself, which can be aimed at more or less honorable purposes for the good of others, which is remarkable. Humans have this amazing capability. Like, we can treat our own bodies as tools for pleasure. That's amazing. And the thing about tools is that tools are neutral. They make no demands on us. They have no inherent dignity. They are disposable. They are means, not ends. Tools are for pleasure. They help us do something more efficiently. And in the case of sex, our bodies are tools for pleasure. It's remarkable, but horrifying that humans can use their bodies in this way. And sex is not by any means the only way that we instrumentalize our own bodies. So I don't think these numbers, these statistics are actually are a rebuke of the sexual revolution. I think it's actually the natural ice death conclusion of the sexual revolution. When we have intentionally engineered all of the life out of sex because it's too inconvenient and inefficient to our self-realization, this is what we get. When we have intentionally engineered all the life out of sex because it's inconvenient and inefficient, this is the kind of world where we get, where marriage, relationships, children, intimacy, vulnerability are negative consequences that need to be avoided. How do we avoid that? Using porn, avoiding marriage, avoiding procreation at all. Society is giving us the option to have pretty much consequence-free sex and sexual pleasure. I think this is very, very important to note. When churches only focus on all the negative consequences of sex outside of marriage, or the negative consequences of abortion or divorce or whatever, I think they can unintentionally or sometimes intentionally give the impression that the real reason we shouldn't participate in these things is that they produce less than optimal outcomes for our lives. But through contraceptives and through pornography and the declining pressure to get married, the declining pressure to have children, most of these suboptimal outcomes are being removed. They're not really big deals anymore. Shoot, like even feelings of guilt or heartbreak that you can have by, participating in, hookup sex or turning to pornography or whatever, even those things can be dealt with through therapy and antidepressants. There are ways to curb the negative outcomes of all of these things, which is why I think only a secularized faith teaches that the main reason that we live in accordance with God's design is that it produces the greatest outcomes for us in this life. Now, sometimes it absolutely will, but also sometimes it costs us literally everything, including desires that we hold incredibly deep to our heart. If we are our own, then saying no to desires which don't cause measurable harm to others is foolish. It's self-abusive. But if we are our own, nope, scratch that. I'm not going to edit this. If we are not our own, that's the title of my book, You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World, then we have obligations to God and to church, our families, our neighbors, that require us to say no to things, including some of the things that we desire. And in those moments, saying no is actually a really good thing, even if it hurts. And it may be the case that we have been able to build a society that creates certain social outcomes that we feel are or have been traditionally seen as the goals of the culture wars from the conservative perspective. But at the same time, we've achieved those outcomes in part by making sex less and less human, by divorcing it from procreation, by divorcing it from commitment, by divorcing it from vulnerability, by instrumentalizing our bodies and other people's bodies for our own pleasure. And again, all of those things make total sense if we are our own, because if I am my own, then I probably should take advantage of this body and other people's bodies to have pleasure, because this is the only life I get. But if we are not our own, if we belong to God, then I have a responsibility to my neighbor, to my wife, to my children, to my community. And that changes things.